The people of Red Hollow hid in silence. Every house was dark, shutters nailed tight, doors barred with furniture dragged into place. Families crouched beneath windows with their backs to the walls, clutching whatever gave their hands something to do. Rosaries, cracked mirrors, old letters, folded thin from worry. No one spoke above a whisper. Some didn't speak at all, afraid even their breathing might carry. Outside, the town had gone unnaturally still. There was no wind through the streets, no insects in the grass, no creak of wood or rustle of leaves. The air felt thick, heavy, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Then came the footsteps. They were slow measured, heavy enough that each one rolled through the ground like distant thunder. Boom! Boom! Inside the sheriff's office, Elias Ward stood with his back pressed flat against the wall beside the front window. He was 19 years old and had been a deputy for less than a year. Yet the badge on his chest already felt like a lifetime sentence. His eyes were fixed on a small table across the room. On it sat a glass of water, cloudy with dust. Every footstep outside sent ripples across the surface. At first they were faint, trembling rings that barely disturbed the water. But with each step, they grew stronger, sloshing against the glass until droplets jumped over the rim. Elias tightened his grip on his rifle and stared harder at the water, as if it could tell him what was happening beyond the wall. His jaw clenched until his teeth ached. What had Red Hollow done? What mistake had they made that the world itself had turned against them? A shadow slid across the window. It blocked what little starlight remained, stretching long and distorted across the floor. Elias pressed himself tighter into the wall, soothed his eyes, and prayed without words. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Then came breathing. Deep, slow, powerful. It fogged the window from the outside. In the reflection of a broken photograph frame lying on the floor, one that held a picture of Elias and his mother before she passed, he saw something move. An eye, large enough that it filled the reflection. Unblinking, curious, hungry. If Elias had courage left in him, he would have turned and fired. He would have raised the rifle, aimed for the center of that terrible gaze, and pulled the trigger. Instead, he froze. Fear rooted him in place, stealing his breath and turning his legs weak. Shouting erupted outside. Voices screamed, feet pounded against dirt and wood. Something crashed in the distance. The breathing vanished. The shadow pulled away from the window. Elias slid down the wall and sat on the floor, shaking, alive by nothing more than luck. He barely had time to realize that before dread returned like a hand closing around his throat. He stood and looked out the window. In Tisquev, the preacher and several townsfolk had rushed out of the church. They waved crosses, held up prayer beads, and shouted words they barely believed themselves. They ran in circles, trying to surround something far larger than they were. The ground shook. A roar tore through the night, so loud it rattled the glass in every building, and the creature lunged. Long before that night, Red Hollow had been a town obsessed with endings. The end of the world. The final judgment. The day when the earth would open and swallow the unworthy whole. Living so far from everything else, it already felt as if time had passed them by. The railroad never reached them. Traders came rarely. Letters arrived months late, if at all. The land was dry, stubborn, and unforgiving. So when the flash happened, many believed it was the end they'd been warned about. Every person in Red Hollow experienced it at the same moment. A white light filled their vision, brighter than the sun and sharp enough to hurt. For a split second, Elias thought he'd gone blind. Then the light vanished, leaving behind a pressure behind his eyes and a ringing in his ears. People stumbled out of their homes, shielding their faces and squinting into the daylight. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Then Elias noticed the land. The plains were gone. The shape of the hills remained, but the dry grass had vanished, replaced by dense, towering trees with thick undergrowth choking the ground. The air felt wet and heavy, rich in a way that made breathing feel strange, almost intoxicating. The sky looked the same, but it felt closer somehow, pressing down on them. Someone screamed. By the time Elias reached the sound, a man lay dead in the dirt, his face pale and his eyes wide open. No wound marked him. No blood stained the ground. By nightfall, 6 people had died. Chickens lay scattered across yards, stiff and unmoving. One horse collapsed beside the water trough outside the saloon, its body half submerged as if it had simply given up. He had learned to read late, and writing still came slow to him, but he forced himself to put the day down on paper. His hand cramped as he struggled through each sentence, sounding out words in his head as he went. If the town was going to vanish, someone had to remember it. The next morning, the sheriff called a meeting. It dissolved into chaos. Some people wept and prayed, convinced they had been chosen and taken to paradise. Others shouted that they were cursed, damned, abandoned by God. Accusations flew, old grudges resurfaced. No one listened to the farm boy who tried to explain that his chickens were missing. Elias did. He followed the boy behind the barn, where the dead birds had been stacked the day before. The pile was gone. In its place was a footprint pressed deep into the dirt. It was larger than any animal Elias had ever seen. 3-toed, heavy, wrong. Over the following days, things only grew worse. Food ran low. No traders arrived. The paths leading away from Red Hollow vanished into endless forest. The sheriff ordered no one to leave town until they understood what was happening. A group tried anyway. They took a wagon and one of the last horses in the night. The next morning, Elias found the wagon abandoned on the trail. Supplies lay scattered, as if dropped in panic. The horse was gone. That night, the preacher woke Elias by shaking him hard. They looked out toward the shallow graves on the edge of town. Something was digging. It stood taller than a man, its body long and flexible, moving with a slow, deliberate grace. Its eyes glinted faintly in the dark. Elias fired his rifle. The shot echoed uselessly into the trees. The creature barely reacted. Elias didn't fire again. Days later, the sheriff returned from a scouting attempt, his face pale and his voice hollow. He spoke of a massive reptile moving through the forest, larger than any building, powerful enough to snatch a horse and toss it aside like a toy. That night, the hunter came. It stepped into the square, its presence crushing, ancient, inevitable. Gunfire rang out from every direction. Bullets sparked uselessly against thick hide. Buildings shattered beneath sweeping blows. When all hope was gone, the sheriff ran forward with fire in his hands. The explosion lit the night brighter than the flash. When the dust settled, the creature lay still. The town stood in silence. A child finally asked the question no one else could voice. What do we do now? Red Hollow vanished not long after. No record explains how. Years later, miners uncovered something impossible: buildings buried beneath layers of stone far older than any human settlement should be. Tools, weapons, a journal, its pages miraculously preserved. The final entry ended mid-sentence. Above the site, fossils of ancient creatures were found nearby. One was missing its skull. The earth remembers, even when the world forgets.